Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Expert, QuickBooks' interactive live stream panel for our small businesses and accountant communities. I'm George Kousouros, and I identify as a gay man. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm your host for today's discussion. Thanks for bearing with us a few more minutes as we sorted out some technical difficulties. I'm the Learning, Development and Quality Manager for our customer success organization, and I'm also the global leader of the Intuit Pride Network, an employee resource group that works to empower our LGBTQ+ employees, customers, and communities around the world. I'm thrilled to be hosting this discussion today where we can explore resilience and representation with some of our customers. We'll also be taking questions from across Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn for the duration of the session. So please do share any questions you might have for our panel in the comments of the live feed. Resilience is so important for the LGBTQ+ community. We live in really frightening and dangerous times. But these times are changing. At Intuit, we pride ourselves on helping our community bring their whole selves to work and helping them do the best work of their lives. And we call that being stronger together, which is one of our values. Earlier this month, we invited staff, our community, and families to join us at Pride in London. Opportunities like that, marching together and joining in the face of adversity, is what means for me to be resiliently proud. And on that note, let me hand it over to our guests for today to introduce themselves, George, Owen, and Isabella. It's great to have you with us. George and Owen, if you can introduce yourselves, your pronouns, how you identify, and your role.
So hi, I'm Owen. I'm one of the co-founders of LuvJus, and I identify as a gay man, and I use the pronouns he and him.
Hello, my name is George Chattey, also co-founder of LuvJus. I'm a gay man and identify as a he, him.
Brilliant. Thanks, George and Owen. I'm not sure we have Isabella on just yet. We'll have...
I'm here.
We do have you. Brilliant. Isabella, nice to have you. Introduce yourself.
Hi, sorry. I'm Isabella. I'm a chartered accountant and I'm a trans woman. My pronouns are she, her.
Thanks, everyone. So a warm welcome to everyone watching and to our panel. So to kick things off, George and Owen, I'd like to know for you both personally what it means to be resiliently proud.
I think resilience is inherently a part of kind of what you are as a queer person and part of the community, because I think you've had to all your life, kind of up until you come out, you've had to basically maybe that kind of pretend, like hide yourself or like build up facade, build up walls to kind of fit into society. So I think there's kind of resilience. There's a constant thing of pushing, like maybe hiding initially. And then I think what makes it resiliently proud is then once you've come out, I think it's trying to break down all that. Like obviously coming out is hard, and I'm not dissing that at all. It was obviously one of the hardest things to do at point. And then that next stage, of kind of figuring out who you are and figuring out your community and figuring kind of where you fit in with kind of society and stuff like that. I think that is almost one of the hardest parts of being gay. It's one of the best parts because you get to kind of figure out who you are. But I think that's when I would say kind of like what makes us resilient and proud is trying to find out who you were meant to be, like who you were meant to be if we were born into a world where you weren't, where being queer or queer wasn't kind of put you on the peripheries of society. So that's what I would say.
George, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, you know, from coming out and being, you know, filled with shame and self-hatred, and then, you know, from where we are now, you know, it's impressive, you know, and I think a lot of LGBT people feel like that. So yeah, you know, and I think doing LuvJus has massively helped with my journey. It's coming out, you know, finding pride in it where originally I didn't have it, and now, you know, it's really helped.
Isabella, how about yourself?
Oh, hi, yeah. Resilient. First of all, I agree with both the previous two speakers. Very, very well said. I think from a trans point of view, resilience is if you're LG, if you're gay, you have a choice whether you wish to share your sexuality with people or not. Generally, being trans, you tend to sort of wear a bit of a label on your forehead. So the resilience is overriding the looks that you get, or people not quite understanding whether the voice matches the appearance, or if you're taller than genetic females. And you've got to rise above that. That's the resilience. And that takes a while to do. But thankfully, we live in a society which is quite helpful. It was. But I won't go into that. The pride bit is to come through the resilience, to get over the looks, to be able to zone out and just get people to see for the person that you are.
Thanks to all of you. I think the word resilience really resonates with the LGBTQ plus community, and all three of you have just illustrated their different ways in which the community shows resilience in different times and in different journeys, right? Each of those letters in the LGBTQ and the plus, because there's so many more, we don't just fit into this one neat little box. Everyone has different stories of resilience and overcoming adversity, and yet we're all here standing quite proudly in the face of that adversity, and that's really nicely illustrated by what you all said there. So George and Owen, I'd like to hear about your experience of starting a proudly LGBT plus brand in the drinks industry, which is LuvJus, which tastes brilliantly, by the way. I told you before, I'm a particular fan of the gin flavor. How did that come about?
Do you want to take this one, George?
Yeah, I'll take over. So, I mean, obviously, setting up a business now in the last 3 years has been incredibly difficult. I mean, probably the hardest it's been for at least since probably the 70s, 80s or something. I mean, we've had 3 sort of black swan events, in our path. So, COVID, Brexit, now this cost of living, inflation crisis. So, it's not been easy, and we've kept going, survived. But, not only have we done that, but, when we were first starting, even coming up with an LGBT brand, when we approach investors and even friends, family, people said, are you sure? You sure you should be, targeting this demographic, and would it potentially hurt sales elsewhere? And, that shows that it's not perfect, and it's still perceived in a negative light, being, the LGBTQ plus community. Whilst things have improved for certain members, there's still a lot more work to be done. But, and that actually just made us want to do it more, because when you hear that, you think, right, actually something needs to be done, and you're not going to change attitudes by just listening to them and ignoring it. You've got to do something about it.
So, and I think jumping onto George's point, I think it's a really interesting thing. And I think that's something we've always, because I think at the beginning, we approached largely predominantly kind of more queer, whether it's venues or people. And it was quite interesting at the start, because I think we did face a little bit of resistance even within our own community. And obviously, our community is great, but we have to also be vocal that it's not perfect as well. And so I think as we moved on from there, luckily we've actually come out the other side. And I think a lot of the kind of significance when you're approaching queer people is people want to know that you're doing it right. And I think, there's lots of conversations about during Pride Month or a thing of everybody jumping on the bandwagon of just kind of putting a rainbow flag or putting there, or, M&S famously did the LGBT sandwich, but no profits went anywhere. And it's kind of this thing. So it's making sure you're doing it right. So I think once people had assessed that we got it right and understood the charitable elements and saw the work we were doing, I think that was really nice. But I think that's very important for a brand like us, is to get that right and make sure. And George, I was going to jump on the back of what you said at the end. Can you remember what you said?
Something about approaching investors and just getting initial feedback about the idea, and how, it was definitely, perceived in a negative light, targeting the LGBT community, and,
No, it's gone.
Not necessarily giving money back, but targeting that community.
It's gone.
It's gone for now. It'll come back later, and I'll interrupt.
But what, Owen, you've said something that I'd like for you to elaborate on a little bit. You spoke about doing it right and the charitable element. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about the charitable organisation, because there's a lot you do to support charities?
So I think for George and I, when we came up with this idea, kind of we were at Tel Aviv Pride, it started with being like, what would be our perfect drinks? I'm yeast intolerant, so I couldn't have beer and wine. And there's lots of drinks with sugary flavors and stuff. So we came up with that element of it. But then we also were going, there's such a big part of where we came up with this idea was our community. And I think that was something that at the very, very start, almost like then the initial concept was going, okay, cool. So our community, a place of safety, a place of kind of like, whether it's the clubs, whether it's your friends, whether it's anybody, it's like, it's the first place, your chosen family, your queer chosen family. All of these things are the first place that you kind of feel an element of safety where you can really be yourself. And it's so much fun and it's amazing. You're forced into the periphery society, but from that comes a culture. From that becomes like really amazing personalities. And I think that we wanted to try and kind of infuse that into our product with everything that we did. But also, I think we wanted to make sure that we gave back as well. It couldn't just be take. It needs to be, everything needs to be taken and give, And so I think so from the word go, we decided to give 5% of all our profits to LGBTQ plus charities. So we work with Stonewall Housing, who house queer teenagers who have dealt with domestic violence or homelessness. So we have a close partnership with them. And then the aim is, because we're obviously a still startup, we work with them predominantly, but we've started kind of other relationships, so with Opening Doors, who work with queer people who are kind of above the age of 50, 60, who have maybe suffered with loneliness and stuff. They create stuff. They create like events and socials and things like that. And so I think ultimately we will continue to work with kind of, as our company gets bigger, we'll increase kind of who we work with. But also we do, with our merch and merch and other events, 100% of profits goes to charity as well. So I think that's maybe the common misconception is people go, oh, you've only donated 5%. Why are you not donating more? We go, no, that's of our company from now forever. And then we'll do like individual like events or things where 100% will go. But it's also a case, it's not just that, it's a case of creating platforms for queer talent, for young queer artists who make kind of design stuff for us. And, it's allowing people to be paid properly, because a lot of, queer people or artists in general, but predominantly queer people get underpaid. So I think it's creating a healthy workspace. And as we say, we call our work team our family at the moment. We're not that big yet, but I think that's important. So I do waffle a lot, as you probably already know. So
no, you're doing fine. So next, I want to touch on diversity, and we'll touch both your business and also the accountant realm as well with Isabella. But can you, either George or Owen, tell us a bit more about what diversity looks like in the food and beverage industry?
Well, I think my background's in food and drink. I used to work for a big corporate before setting up LuvJus, and diversity is a huge issue, particularly in the alcohol industry. Alcohol does have that sort of laddie mentality, and I think a lot of women and LGBTQ plus people from diverse backgrounds do find it difficult. I know I certainly did. I know the bigger companies are doing a lot to try and change that, but it's certainly a different story when you deal with, on the ground, with small and medium-sized businesses. Again, particularly outside London, it's different across the country. And so, the alcohol industry certainly needs to diversify and modernize. And I think, again, part of the reason, I don't think it's a coincidence that, alcohol amongst younger consumers is in decline. And it's partly because they're not developing and not modernizing and not diversifying. They're not targeting a newer, more modern society, I don't think. A lot more needs to be done. And it's good that attitudes are changing amongst the top, but it does need to trickle down more.
Because when George and I first started, we still do it from time to time, but it's in like you go from pub to pub and bar to bar selling your drink. And, at the beginning, you had people being like, what's this? Like, no, like, it's not beer. Blah, blah, blah. And that's still, and I guess in some ways it is, there's an element, when you go back to your last question, there is that element of you did feel slightly uncomfortable. But then equally in some ways, it was harmless in some ways, but I think it's that barrier of kind of not like saying something, but also you've got to realize that you are on somebody else's terms. So it's 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 that queer thing of going, when do you step in, when do you go, this is a problem, or when do you go, and when you're pitching to somebody with your drink, it's sometimes a hard thing to do. So, but equally, as you say, it's not necessarily the people you'd want to work with. But as George says, it was hard, but they are coming round now to our drinks category.
They are. I mean, just anecdotally, me personally going out, that you're dealing with younger people, you can see that change in attitude has changed. That it's there. It's not. They're much more accepting. That's a positive sign. I think that times are changing.
And it sounds like you've seen an impact of the lack of diversity in the market, and you've mentioned people's perceptions or the lack of ability to attract a different customer base. Can you give some examples of where you've actually seen that happen?
Yeah, I mean, there is a figure, but it's something. I should know off the top of my head, but what younger people now are not drinking. And that's obviously partly to do with health issues and reasons to not drink. But I also think, the style of drinks and the marketing is certainly not catered to them. I mean, maybe we're hoping that will change with LuvJus. The style of our liquid is more geared to a younger audience. It's slightly healthier. It's not healthy, but healthier. And obviously we're supporting a community, the community that's been underrepresented, and no one's really been doing it. These big guys might do it once a month, but then suddenly it stops, and that's partly why I want to set up LuvJus, is that, we were sitting on a beach in Tel Aviv at Pride, yet there was no LGBT business there, set up by queer people, that's crazy.
And if you look at something like this, like with Bud Light recently, am I allowed to? Oh, I've said it now. Am I allowed to reference people? So obviously Bud Light did this campaign in America with a trans influencer. I'm really sorry, I've forgotten their name. But obviously the right wing went absolutely crazy, and it was so upsetting to watch, because Bud Light eventually detracted the ad campaign, and this obviously been seen everywhere, and it just felt like, especially for everything that's going on with trans rights and trans hatred in this world, let's call it out. That was a very upsetting thing for a drinks brand, and it's not the first time, and it's not going to be the last time, to just see how fickle they could be, to see how they would make a quick buck, and then that would happen. And the influencer, it's like, I didn't actually know much about them before, and I really did my research into them afterwards. And they're a really cool individual who does lots of they do loads of really amazing things. And it just felt like I think it was just a very good example to see where people are trying to, one, jump on a bandwagon, but two, also show that we did it wrong, and that the drinks industry is still very predominantly led by men and also quite right.
There's certainly a lack of authenticity, isn't there? When ultimately, I think for these big guys, the bottom line is ultimately what they care about.
Money.
So it's not really, if you're, and withdrawing that ad, I think, kind of shows maybe their true colours. Yeah.
Let's jump to talking on the topic of diversity. Let's jump to the accountant space. Isabella, we've, through some research, we've uncovered that 1 in 5 accountants leave the accountancy space, because of a lack of diversity. What's your experience with this, and what does diversity mean for an accountant?
Okay, so I think first of all, I'm privileged because I'm quite senior in age and position within the accountancy profession. I've been doing this job for many years. I have to say that I'm a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales, and they have been absolutely excellent in helping me on my journey when I transitioned, which was some 10 years plus ago, and nothing was a problem at all. Work-wise, my colleagues have all been pretty accepting. Clients ditto. So I've only had, within the accounting profession, really good experiences, but I reiterate, that's because I'm senior. How would it be for less senior people? I think it's still a very accepting profession. And contrary to sort of most other things in my life and dealing with other social aspects, I've found that the accountancy profession is accepting of diversity and embracing it, because it helps us to bring new talent into the accountancy profession.
Brilliant. And on that note, this is an opportunity, I guess, for influence and to kind of share best practice and your thoughts on the topic. So what do you think leaders in the accountant and bookkeeper industry can do to promote diversity and inclusion? It's a matter of education and training, or is it awareness? How do you view it?
I think it's awareness. I think that from a trans point of view, when I meet people, it takes them a couple of minutes to sort of adjust to me and see beyond maybe what they first see the inner person. But the accountancy profession, we're accepting of all genders, all sexual orientation, all ethnicity, because we want to do a good job for people. And I don't see any barriers. I think that if you've got the skills, then you'll progress.
Brilliant. Is there anything, if there were, I mean, it sounds like you've had such a great journey and your working environment is great and you feel like you can be yourself. If there are accountancy firms out there where that's not the case and people feel like they need to mask who they truly are or not bring their whole selves to work, what would you recommend those organizations do?
I think that possibly I suggest they get some outside consultation to explain to them diversity issues and bring to their attention ways in which maybe they can improve or get rid of possibly the unconscious bias that they have. And there are some good, I'm not advertising people. I know that there's a group called Butterflies who are particularly good. I know the two people who run that, and they do go out and they talk with larger firms. Stonewall's trying to get into helping trans people. I think they've got a little way to go, but they're certainly stepping in there. But we live in a very worrying country now with, sadly, the anti-trans stuff which is coming out in the press and generally stuff we have to deal with. That's probably more concern to me than diversity in the accounting profession, because I think we're getting there pretty diverse. I think the legal profession's doing really well and maybe in front of the accounting profession, but we recognise that we need good people. Possibly also because I'm based in London, it's a little bit more accepting. I don't know what it may be like in other parts of the country.
Yeah, and I think having the opportunity to educate people or to and to kind of get rid of these unconscious biases that you mentioned at work, then can influence them in their daily lives. And then this is who you see out in society. We spend so much time in our lives at work. It's such a great opportunity, such a great platform to demonstrate the best of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and show people what good practice looks like. DEI is so high on lots of organizations' agenda. Working at Intuit, I mentioned earlier that I'm the global leader for our employee resource group, the Pride Network. And we work with charities, with organizations that specialize in trans rights, for example, or youth charities. And so we brought them in and they've done educational sessions for our people, whilst we're supporting them by raising funds, etc. But those organizations are absolutely specialists. And my advice personally to any organization who would like to educate their people is go and work with charities who specialize in certain areas, because A, they need your support, but B, they are specialists. At Intuit, we take it very seriously when it DEI, and some examples are we have inclusive toilets. So for example, if you're trans, whichever stage of the journey you are, we've removed that choice of which bathroom do I go to? Where's the right place for me? There's one, and that's it. It's an inclusive environment. We've done a lot of work on displaying pronouns and educating people about the use of pronouns. We encourage all our employees to demonstrate them on Slack, in their work signatures on emails, and also to wear PIN badges if they want to. We make sure our healthcare policies are inclusive, and that's so important. These are areas where I think people might not fully appreciate why they're different for the LGBT plus community. But if you truly want to make your workplace an inclusive workplace, I suggest you take a good look at your healthcare policies. And then our security team as well. You know, we're always on, we have a global security team, and we're always on alert to understand what potential threats there might be for our employees who identify as LGBTQ plus. So for those watching, I just want to take this opportunity to remind you that you can ask questions. You can do this across Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. And if you do have any thoughts or questions for our panel, please leave them in the comments of the live feed and we'll answer them shortly. So George and Owen, given your journey in the beverage industry, for those who are listening, who are looking to start a business and identify as LGBTQ plus, what would you advise them? What would your advice be to them?
Well, go for it. First of all, you got to get going. And LGBT, like Owen said at the beginning, LGBTQ plus people are literally resilient. We've gone through a lot worse than actually setting up a business. When after you've done it, you'll think, oh, well, actually, it was much easier than coming out or living our true lives, I'd say. So yeah, yourself.
I would, and also as I said, it's just keep going, because the amount of stuff that you will hit, and it feels like the whole company's falling apart, and you're just going, oh my god, like this is crazy. What are we going to do? And it's taking that moment. It's take a little moment, feel what you're feeling, and then be like, right, okay, cool. How do we solve this? Let's go, and let's not stop again. And I think, especially George, like he's really incredible at doing that. When it gets a bit much, George is like a bulldozer. He's like, come on, we just got to keep going. And I think that's really important.
Have a meltdown, also, and then I'll be okay.
Yeah, but I think also it's good to, in terms of like a team, I would say like, finding the correct business partner, finding somebody you work with, you complement each other is vastly important. And then also building your team correctly. And I think it's very, money never goes as far as you think it does, obviously. So I think it's making the most of that money and finding a good team. And also and the world we live in now, like, one of the biggest things we do is tapping into like social media and content, and working how that works your company has been one of the biggest turning points, I'd say, in our company as well. Even though I was so resistant, as George knew, to the old TikTok, it is important. And so I think those would be like, team resilience and social media. God, that's so lame. I hate the world we live in, but that's the truth.
You've got to listen to your customer, right? If that's where your customer lives and that's how you want to talk, you've got to speak.
And it's free. There are so many ways you can test and learn and do stuff on a shoestring budget.
And guerrilla
my other thing would be start small. That's my other advice. What you think you don't know until you've created a product and you've tested it. It will change. So I always recommend that.
Yeah, we had quite a few times when George would be like, right, let's do an advert. And I'd come up with an advert that probably would cost like 100 grand. And he'd be like, so I really like a few of these ideas. Let's just make it for like 1,000 or 500. I'd be like, yeah, cool, let's do this.
Brilliant. We know who's the dreamer and who brings it all back down.
Yeah,
I
get it. Crashes. Who crashes Owen's dreams? Yeah, crashes on dreams.
Isabella, what advice do you have for someone who identifies as LGBT plus and is looking to get into the industry as an accountant or a bookkeeper?
I think as was already said, just go for it. Nobody's going to judge you whatsoever. Can you do the job? We're really not worried about your sexual orientation, gender, whatever. As I said before, if you've got the skills, just go for it. Will you get any resistance from people? I think in anything in life, you may get a little bit of pushback, but you've just got to dig deep and get over it.
It's about that resilience that we spoke about earlier. Just listening to all of you talk throughout the last half hour, everything you're saying to me says resilience. And if you want it, you'll fight for it, and you'll succeed.
And I think, sorry, just to chime back in one, it's kind of saying that it's like when it's also learning coming from like a queer point of view, it's also learning when you do chime in and make a point, and then when you never, and I think it's one of those things, I think we briefly spoke about before, was like when we were going for investment, there was the odd meeting when it just became very apparent that they weren't going to be right for us, and it became a little bit uncomfortable, just the kind of type of questions they were asking. And I think now it's like we didn't really say anything. We just kind of because you're polite, you need to be polite, and you kind of just go, right, this isn't for us, and we're just going to leave. But then you do come out feeling a bit like, should we have said something? Like what? And I think George and I have got quite good at being a little bit tongue in cheek. When somebody says something, you don't come in straight away, like just to let you know you're wrong, because nobody really likes being told they're wrong. Let's face it. Just look at our House of Parliament when you've got two parties being like, boom, boom, they all blow up.
It's so true. We're definitely standing up for ourselves a lot more now.
No, we do. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm saying we're standing up for ourselves, but I think 100%. I'm saying that as in but it's just like it's having that it's building that confidence. You're not going to be when you're starting out as a queer company. We did not have. Sorry, this is what I'm trying to say. We did not have that confidence at the beginning.
Yeah.
We didn't have that confidence because we needed stuff from people that we didn't say it. And I think that's what now I'm saying we've got to is we go. If there's somebody who says, oh, LuvJus, like, oh, I would never drink that, even these gays wouldn't drink that. And I go, okay, cool, tell me why, hun. No, go on, tell me why. Let's go. And then you can bring them round in a nice way. And it's a nice way. You're educating, you're not accusatory. And I think that has been one of the biggest lessons of going, we can stand up for ourselves. We can do it in this way. And also if people come back to you in a rude, then that's the point to go, well, I'm really sorry. We've been nothing but polite here. We don't want this relationship to continue. And I think that's also important in being in the queer, because it does happen with George and I and with kind of people we speak to. So I think in a roundabout way, I feel I've said what I meant to say, but who knows?
It's almost when when someone goes for a job interview and some advice that I hear a lot of people give is that remember that you're interviewing them as well as them interviewing.
Yeah.
When you're a small business and going out to tender clients, etc. Yes, obviously compromises need to be made as you build your business, but there's also that point where if you feel uncomfortable in this space with these people or with an organization, then it's probably not right for you.
No.
So I think the key here is you always have a choice, right? We have some questions come in. It's that time where we can answer some questions. So we have Amy on LinkedIn asking, as a business owner, what can I do to foster a culture where people feel accepted and valued? I'm going to shoot this over to Isabella, because Isabella, it sounds that your work environment is absolutely descriptive of that. So what advice can you give?
I think just welcome everybody for who they are. I transitioned in the workplace some 10 years ago, and everybody, it's quite a large company, and everybody bar 2-3 ladies were accepting of my transition. I had to deal with the hostility, the usual toilet questions, etc. But eventually, through all the other people within that practice, it wasn't a problem. I was just accepted because I got at doing my job. And then recently, getting older, I want to work less hard, and I've moved my practice to another practice. And during that interview process, as you say, I was interviewing them as much as they were interviewing me. I came across no anti-trans again. We just want good people, and do everything you can to foster a healthy family environment. And I think that will help people joining the firm and feeling part of the firm.
Definitely. Something that we do at Intuit when we recruit is we're very, very conscious about, first of all, helping everyone feel accepted and themselves. So things like demonstrating pronouns and but also being mindful of the language we use and the way we put ourselves across. But then also the actual hiring framework. We make sure that we have a diverse panel of people during the interviewing processes, and so that everyone can feel represented in some way, but also that we're making sure that there isn't that bias in the room, and that the framework is very much built around making sure there's a very fair decision. So in answer to the question on, I guess, how you feel people make people feel accepted from the outset, that's the beginning. And then once they're in the work environment, really depends how large the organization is. But I mentioned our employee resource groups, where we've got about 14 different resource groups that are based on faith, sexual orientation, ability. There's lots of different resource groups, but everyone feels they belong and they feel represented. But then also there's so much education out there that you can do for you and for your team, around language, around policy, around all these things. So I would recommend just trying to educate yourself and your colleagues as much as possible in that space. And Amy, you also mentioned making people feel valued. So I'm just going to shoot this over to George and Owen. How do you help your team feel valued?
Owen, do you want
to? Okay. I think we have like a very much like a policy kind of work environment where I think communication is key. I think openness to a certain degree, to a certain level. And I think we always say, it's like we say from the word go, it's like, if you're having a bad day with your mental health, or if there's anything like, however tell us, like, please tell us, because like the worst thing you can do for yourself, for the business, for everything, is to turn up and actually be feeling awful, do a bad job, and then you feel worse. And I was like, so I think that's just one example where they're just very open with everybody. We want you to be open. We want you to be communicative with us. Because I think we like to run our company with kind of love and kindness, as it were. I know obviously we're a small company, so I think it's an easier thing to do. As we grow, we'll have to filter in. But I think feeling valued, do you mean feeling valued in general, or feeling valued as a queer person? Sorry, or both?
I think both. Just how would you address that? Helping people wherever they're from, whatever the sexual orientation is, whoever they are as people, how do you help them feel valued?
I think it's just listening. I think listening is one of the biggest keys, like being able to sit down with anybody in your company and really listen to what they're going through and how you can help them. And I just say that. So I was like, if something goes wrong, it's not on you. It's like, if something goes wrong, it's on the whole company to step up as a whole and fix this problem. And I think when it comes to like finger pointing and stuff like that creates a very negative atmosphere in a company. It creates, it's quite poisonous. So I think it's listening, and it's also just telling people when they do a great job. George and I, without banging on about our team again, have got a fantastic team. And I think it's one of those things, they do blow us away the whole time. So it's quite easy for us to be like, you're doing an incredible job, well done. And, and it's having that work after work environment, going for drinks, doing our work and doing that, creating that social environment that we all want to be. But in terms of like queerness, it's like, this sounds really awful, but it's like, we are just generally quite empathetic people. Empathy, it's like the key to life. Empathy, just try and put yourself in the shoes of other people. Try and remove your ego. Ego is the enemy of life. Empathy is your friend. And I think that's one of the biggest things that, God, I sound so wishy-washy, sorry. I'll bring out my spiritual
You're speaking from the heart, and that's great. I think you said something really important there, which is listening. And also, listening out for how people like to be rewarded and recognized. And, so saying, well done, great job to someone might be enough for them, might be amazing, might make their year. For someone else, it might be different. They might like a badge on your intranet or something like that. For other people, it might be remuneration. So everyone likes to be recognized and helped to feel valued in different ways. So listening to how people want to be recognized and valued is so important. Aaron on LinkedIn says, great topic and great to see Ask the Expert back on the screens. Thanks for tuning in. And Leonie on Instagram has asked, when something goes wrong or someone does accidentally say something insensitive, how do you handle that in a right way? I'm going to shoot this over to Isabella first.
I thought you might. It's painful when, particularly for me, if you get misgendered. So somebody will refer to me as sir, as they did this morning on the telephone. It's really a bit of a stab in the chest. And years ago, when I first transitioned, I would get hostile about it and angry. Now, actually, I just try to ignore it and say, actually, it's not sir, it's madam, if you don't mind. and just internalize the hurt that you've had and just try and rise above it. It is painful, yeah. It also depends who says it and how it's said. So if somebody who has known me for many, many years, old friends, may accidentally call me by my old name or by the wrong pronoun, I get it. I understand. They know me for a long time. I just shrug it off, and generally they're the one that apologise rather than me say something. If, on the other hand, it's somebody that hasn't known me for very long and does it in a possibly assertive or what I take to be insulting manner, probably does it on purpose, then I will address it and I will say, no, actually, you need to use the right pronoun, please. And sometimes I get the response, what's the pronoun? That tells you the level of the individual you may be dealing with. And it's tough. It hurts. It hurt this morning on the telephone, but you've just got to deal with it.
I think there's something there around intention as well, right? So what was the intention behind addressing you like that, or saying something in the wrong way? And I think that this question applies to many scenarios, to many cases. If the intention is benign, so to speak, then it can be addressed with education. But if the intention is to hurt, then that's a whole different conversation.
But I completely agree with this. And I think that's also where it's like, I hope our world does move towards that more, because I think, there's so much of this kind of fear is led by actually people not wanting to get it wrong, but getting it wrong because they're not entirely sure. But then obviously it stops conversations about it. But obviously it's a double-edged sword, because then you can't be constantly getting your education from somebody else, that you should be doing your own education. But I think it's like, intentions is so important. I think that's across like so many areas. We do need to look at the intention, because if somebody isn't meaning to be mean, it's like it's hard not to take it personally. But I think things blow up so much. Quite a few of my friends have recently in the last couple of years come out non-binary, and it's I in a shoot said, oh can you get him? And of course they said them. And I went, oh, I'm so sorry, I feel so awful. And they were like, honey, like there was no malice in that. I'm going to correct you, because if I don't correct you, what's the point? And like, and then of course, and then it was that thing that then basically since then I've only addressed them as them. But I think it's you need to be having those conversations. But when I spoke to them, they were saying, oh, I sometimes refer to myself. I name myself. And they were like, so it's like, I know it's not from you from malice, but then that's a very different thing to somebody actively making it kind of like vindictive and malicious at you. And that's just the worst. But I think it's like people need to distinguish between those two. But yeah.
And you almost want to make it okay for people to feel like they can make mistakes, right? Because otherwise they won't try at all, and they'll feel scared. So we're almost at time. Thanks for everyone's questions, and a reminder that if you need any advice or have any questions about topics we've covered today or anything else, join our official Intuit QuickBooks community group on Facebook. And the links to our small business group and our accountant and bookkeeper group are linked on our profile next to the stream, and we have experts from the industry on hand 24/7. Now, before we finish, as experts in your own fields who identify as LGBTQ+, my panel, what message of resilience do you want to share with our viewers in a really short space of time? So Isabella, I'll come to you first.
I'll just repeat the message of just let people be who they want to be, and you'll rise above any difficulties that you encounter along the way.
George?
I think if you're any budding LGBT entrepreneurs who want to set up their business, I think back yourself, you're more resilient than you think, and you've got nothing to lose, just go for it.
And I say, just read when you come across these kind of queer LGBT issues in the press, just really read as much as you can. Don't just see a headline. Don't just read a right-wing press. Don't read the Daily Mail full stop. And just try and see through what they're doing. The trans community at the moment have used such as scapegoat, not goat, I'm not Australian, scapegoat by the right-wing media and right-wing politicians. So I think just really try and see what's going on there.
Great, thank you. That's all we have time for today. So thank you to our panel, Owen, George, and Isabella, for sharing your experiences, for showing vulnerability, and thank you for inspiring us with your outlook on resilience. And thank you for joining us across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I'd like to encourage you not to let this be a moment in time. Share what you've learned with your colleagues, your friends, your family, and your communities. Share that we are all just people trying to live equally in a world of equality, or inequality sometimes. Let's continue educating ourselves on how we can be allies for each other, because there is resilience in allyship. Thanks for listening.